And every time he rose, the establishment grew more afraid. So they did what they always do. They launched the smear machine. Anonymous leaks, twisted headlines, manufactured outrage. They painted him as dangerous, divisive, un-American. But the more they attacked, the more people listened. Because Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't play their game. He kept showing up. That's when they sent him. The man in the suit. The one with the smirk. A political hitman dressed as a public servant. Backed by donors, coached by strategists, armed with talking points designed to break Traoré down. He wasn't there to debate. He was there to bury. They chose the hearing as the battleground. Cameras rolling. Microphones hot. A stage built for humiliation. The plan was simple. Corner Traoré, twist his words, and make him stumble. Then feed the footage to the networks and watch the narrative shift. But they underestimated him. Because Traoré wasn't just prepared, he was principled. And when the moment came, when the villain leaned into the mic and began his assault, something unexpected happened. The room didn't lean toward him. It leaned away. His words, meant to wound, began to unravel. His tone, meant to dominate, began to grate. And Traoré? He didn't blink. Because the truth doesn't flinch. He was born into power. Not the kind earned through struggle or service. The kind inherited like a family crest. His father was a senator. His grandfather, a judge. His name opened doors before he could walk through them. Prep schools, Ivy League halls, private clubs where decisions were made long before ballots were cast. From the beginning, he was taught one thing. Control the narrative, and you control the people. And he did. He rose fast. Too fast. Not because he inspired, but because he intimidated. His speeches were polished, but hollow. His policies favored the few, cloaked in language that sounded like reform, but smelled like regression. He built his career tearing others down. Activists, immigrants, whistleblowers. Anyone who threatened the comfort of the elite. But this time, he picked the wrong target. Before the hearing, his record was already stained. A leaked memo revealed his role in suppressing voter access in marginalized districts. A photo surfaced of him laughing at a fundraiser where refugees were mocked. He dismissed it as taken out of context. But context was never his strength, control was. He once called undocumented workers economic parasites. He claimed systemic racism was a myth perpetuated by lazy minds. And when asked about reparations, he scoffed. History isn't a debt ledger. Every time he spoke, he revealed more than he intended. Arrogance doesn't whisper, it shouts. Social media never forgot. This guy's been shady since day one. Every time he opens his mouth, a lie falls out. Can't wait for Traoré to end this clown. But he didn't care. He believed the system would protect him, that the cameras would favor his suit, not his substance, that the hearing would be his stage, not his reckoning. He rehearsed his lines, practiced his smirk, studied Traoré's record not to understand it, but to weaponize it. He didn't see a man. He saw a threat to his comfort. And threats, in his world, were meant to be neutralized. He had allies, wealthy donors, media pundits who echoed his talking points. A machine built to spin failure into victory. But machines don't feel. And this moment demanded something deeper. Because Traoré wasn't just another opponent. He was a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. The villain's hypocrisy ran deeper than politics. He preached family values while hiding affairs. He spoke of law and order while shielding corrupt allies. He claimed to fight for the people, but never once stepped foot in the neighborhoods he claimed to represent. And now, seated across from Traoré, he was about to face something he couldn't spin: truth. The crowd didn't cheer when he entered. They watched, studied, waited, because they knew what he didn't, that the tide was turning. He leaned into the mic, ready to perform. But the moment he spoke, the cracks began to show. His voice, once commanding, sounded rehearsed. His words, once sharp, felt recycled. And Traoré? He didn't flinch. Because dignity doesn't need a script. And what came next would expose everything he tried to hide. He came from a place most of them couldn't pronounce, let alone understand. A dusty village where the power flickered and the future felt borrowed. Traoré's earliest memories weren't of comfort, they were of resilience. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father walked miles to teach children who couldn't afford shoes. They didn't have much, but they had dignity. And that, they taught him, was non-negotiable. When he arrived in America, he was 13. He didn't speak the language. He didn't know the rules. But he knew how to listen, and he knew how to endure. He was the kid who translated for his parents at the hospital, who stayed late to clean classrooms after everyone else had gone home, who watched classmates mock his accent, then quietly outscore them on every exam. He didn't fight back with fists. He fought back with excellence. In college, he chose community service over internships. While others chased titles, he chased impact. He organized food drives, mentored refugee youth, and stood up for workers who were told they didn't matter. He didn't post about it. He just showed up. There was a moment, one that never made headlines, when a local official tried to shut down a shelter Traoré helped build. The reason? It attracts the wrong kind of people. Traoré didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He stood in front of the building, arms crossed, and said, "Then I must be the wrong kind of person." The shelter stayed open. He carried that quiet strength into public service, never chasing cameras, never chasing applause, just showing up, again and again, for the people who had been told they didn't belong. And that's what made him dangerous. Because Traoré wasn't just prepared for the hearing. He was waiting for the moment when truth would be tested, when dignity would be challenged, when someone would try to erase everything he stood for. He didn't come with a team of strategists. He came with lived experience, with scars that didn't show on camera, with stories that couldn't be twisted. He came with the weight of every child who had ever been told they were too foreign, too poor, too different to matter. And when he sat across from the man who had been sent to destroy him, he didn't see a threat. He saw a pattern, one he'd faced his entire life. But this time, the cameras were rolling. This time, the world was watching. And this time, Traoré wasn't just going to endure. He was going to answer. Because when you've spent your life being underestimated, you learn how to turn silence into power. And what he said next would shake the room to its core. The gavel struck once. The hearing was officially underway. The villain adjusted his tie, leaned into the microphone, and began with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Traoré," he said, dragging out the syllables like they were foreign currency, "you've made quite a name for yourself. But let's talk about what that name really stands for." He launched into his opening salvo, a barrage of accusations dressed as questions, misrepresented statistics, cherry-picked quotes, allegations so thin they barely held shape. But his tone was thick with condescension, each word dipped in disdain. "You claim to represent the people," he sneered, "yet your proposals would bankrupt the very system that protects them. You speak of justice, but your record shows a reckless disregard for law and order. So tell us, Mr. Traoré, are you naive or just dangerously misguided?" The room shifted. Some leaned forward. Others looked away. The tension was no longer ambient. It was palpable. A few staffers exchanged glances. The cameras zoomed in. The villain continued. He referenced a speech Traoré gave years ago, twisting its meaning. He cited a community program Traoré supported, calling it radical redistribution. He invoked national security, economic collapse, and the threat of unchecked idealism. Each sentence was a trap. Each pause, a performance. And through it all, Traoré said nothing. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He sat with his hands folded, eyes steady, absorbing every word like a man collecting evidence. The villain mistook his silence for weakness. He leaned in harder. "You've built your brand on emotion, Mr. Traoré. But this chamber deals in facts. And the fact is, your ideas are dangerous. Your influence is reckless. And your presence here today is a threat to everything this country stands for." The final line hung in the air like smoke. Then Traoré leaned forward. Just slightly. But it was enough. The room froze. The villain paused, unsure whether to continue. The silence was no longer Traoré's. It belonged to everyone. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Because something had shifted. Traoré's gaze met his accusers, and for the first time, the villain blinked. He had come to dominate. But now he was being studied. And what Traoré said next would not only answer the accusations, it would dismantle the entire performance. Because silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. And the moment had arrived. Traoré leaned forward, his fingers interlaced, elbows resting gently on the table. The room, moments ago filled with the villain's voice, was now suspended in silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the cameras seemed to hold their focus, waiting. He spoke softly, but the words landed like thunder. "Thank you for your concerns," he began, eyes locked on the man across from him. "I'd like to respond. Not with emotion. not with rhetoric, but with facts. He reached into a folder and pulled out a document. The villain's eyes narrowed. This, Traoré said, holding it up, is the original proposal you just misquoted. You claimed it would bankrupt the system. But here, on page 3, it clearly outlines a budget-neutral framework, verified by 2 independent economists, one of whom, ironically, was appointed by your own party. A murmur rippled through the room. He placed the document down and pulled another. You referenced my speech from 2019, claimed I called law enforcement a threat. But here's the full transcript. What I actually said was, unchecked power in any institution becomes a threat to justice. That's not anti-law enforcement. That's pro-accountability. Gasps. A few heads turned toward the villain. He shifted in his seat. Traoré wasn't done. You mentioned my support for community programs. Called them radical redistribution. But let's talk about redistribution. He paused. Your campaign accepted over $400,000 from a donor who outsourced jobs and evicted families from low-income housing. That's redistribution. From the vulnerable to the powerful. The villain opened his mouth, then closed it. Traoré continued. You speak of facts. So let's lay them bare. He listed statistics, poverty rates, incarceration disparities, education gaps. Each one backed by data. Each one tied to policies the villain had supported. The room grew heavier with every word. Then came the moment. Traoré pulled out a final sheet. A letter. Handwritten. He unfolded it slowly. This was written by a young girl in my district. Her father was deported. Her mother works 3 jobs. She wrote, I don't know if people like me matter, but when you speak, I feel like maybe we do. Silence. Traoré looked up. You call my ideas dangerous. But what's truly dangerous is a system that tells children like her they don't belong, that their pain is inconvenient, that their dreams are disposable. The villain shifted again. His face, once composed, now betrayed discomfort. He glanced at his notes, but they suddenly felt useless. Traoré leaned in. You came here with a script. I came with a story. He stood. You came to destroy me. He paused. But I came with the truth. The room erupted. Not in chaos, in clarity. Applause broke out from the back. Journalists scribbled furiously. Staffers whispered. The villain sat frozen, his smirk gone, his silence louder than any rebuttal. Social media lit up within seconds. Traoré truth. Did you see that? He dismantled him with grace. This is what leadership looks like. The villain tried to speak. Fumbled. Offered a weak retort about respectful disagreement. But the damage was done. His performance had collapsed under the weight of authenticity. Traoré didn't gloat. He didn't grandstand. He simply gathered his papers, nodded to the chair, and sat back down. Because the mic drop wasn't in the volume. It was in the truth. And the hearing wasn't over. But the narrative had already changed. It started with a single tweet. Traoré didn't just speak. He shook the room. #TraoréTruth. Within minutes, the hashtag was everywhere. Trending in 5 countries. Flooding timelines with clips, quotes, and stunned reactions. The moment Traoré leaned forward, the calm before the storm, became a meme. The mic drop line? Already stitched into TikTok edits, Instagram reels, and reaction videos that racked up millions of views overnight. He came with receipts. Grace under fire. That's leadership. Somebody check on the other guy. He just got evaporated. Celebrities chimed in. A-list actors reposted the clip with fire emojis. Activists called it a masterclass in dignity. Even late-night hosts couldn't resist. One aired the footage with the caption, "When your opponent brings a sword, but you bring the Constitution." News outlets scrambled. The narrative had flipped so fast, anchors were still catching their breath. Headlines shifted from Traoré under fire to Traoré's calm dismantling leaves critics speechless. Editorials praised his poise. Analysts dissected his rebuttal like it was a championship playbook. And the villain? He vanished. No press conference. No follow-up statement. His team issued a vague note about respecting all perspectives, but the damage was done. Politicians who once stood beside him began to distance themselves. One senator deleted old tweets of support. Another issued a statement praising Traoré's commitment to truth and justice. The ripple effect wasn't just political, it was cultural. Young immigrants posted videos sharing their stories, tagging #TraoréTruth. Teachers played the clip in civics classes. Community leaders quoted his final line at rallies. It wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. And Traore? He didn't gloat. He didn't capitalize. He simply posted one line. Truth doesn't need volume. It needs courage. That post alone was shared over 1 million times. But the ripple effect was just beginning. Because when one voice rises with clarity, others begin to find theirs. And what happened next would prove that this wasn't just a takedown. It was a turning point. Traoré stood slowly, the weight of the moment pressing against his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. The room, still humming from the shockwaves of his rebuttal, quieted once more. This time, not out of tension, but reverence. He looked around, not at the cameras, not at the officials, but at the people, the aides, the interns, the staffers in the back row who had watched. Every second with clenched fists and held breath. And then he spoke. "I didn't come here to win a debate," he said, voice steady. "I came here to remind us what public service is supposed to mean." He paused. Dignity, truth, service. 3 words. Simple, but they landed like anchors in a storm. We live in a time where shouting has replaced listening, where power is confused with wisdom, where identity is weaponized instead of celebrated. But I know, that we are better than that. He gestured toward the villain, who now sat motionless, eyes downcast. "I was told I didn't belong, that my name, my story, my skin were liabilities, that I should be grateful to be tolerated. But I didn't come here to be tolerated. I came here to serve." A few heads nodded. One staffer wiped a tear. "I've seen injustice. I've lived it. I've watched my parents work themselves to the bone for a country that didn't always see them. I've walked into rooms where I was the only one who looked like me, and I've stayed. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary." He stepped forward. "We are not defined by who attacks us, but by how we rise." The room held its breath. "That little girl who wrote me, she matters. Her story matters. And so does yours. Whether you were born here or came here. Whether your name fits neatly on a form or stretches across syllables they've never learned to pronounce. You matter." He looked directly into the camera. "And if you've ever been told you don't, I'm here to say, they're wrong." A wave of emotion swept through the chamber. Not loud, not chaotic, just real. This moment wasn't about me. It was about all of us. About reclaiming the idea that truth still matters. That service still matters. That dignity isn't weakness, it's strength. He returned to his seat, but the silence lingered. Because something had shifted. Outside, people watched on phones, in classrooms, in break rooms. Immigrant families huddled. Around screens, young activists replayed the speech. Veterans nodded quietly. Teachers printed the transcript. It wasn't just a takedown. It was a turning point. And as the hearing adjourned and the cameras faded, one truth remained. Traoré didn't just survive the attack. He transformed it. And in doing so, he reminded a nation of something it had almost forgotten. That courage isn't loud. It's steady. And truth, when spoken with dignity, doesn't just echo. It endures. He was sent to destroy Traoré. But in the end, he exposed himself, his arrogance, his contradictions, his fear of truth spoken with dignity. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't retaliate with venom. He stood firm, armed only with facts, lived experience, and the quiet power of conviction. And in doing so, he reminded us all, courage doesn't come from dominance. It comes from clarity. This wasn't just a political moment. It was a moral one. A reminder that truth still matters. That dignity still resonates. That service, when rooted in justice, can shake even the most fortified walls of power. So if this moved you, if you felt seen, heard, or vindicated, don't let it end here. Subscribe, share, be part of the movement. Because the story of Traoré isn't just his. It's ours. And every time we speak up, every time we stand tall, every time we choose truth over fear, we write the next chapter. The screen fades to black. A single heartbeat echoes. Then silence. But the message remains. The room was silent, but the tension was deafening. Dim lights cast long shadows across the polished floor, flickering as camera flashes punctured the stillness like lightning in a storm. Every seat was filled. Journalists leaned forward. Staffers whispered. The air smelled of sweat, ambition, and something colder, intent. He walked in like he owned the place. Crisp suit, chin high, eyes scanning the room with the smugness of a man who believed the outcome was already written. He wasn't here to debate. He was here to dismantle, to humiliate, to destroy. His target sat alone at the far end of the table, hands folded, gaze steady. Traore didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move. He had been through worse, much worse. But today, the stakes were different. Today, the attack wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. He was sent to destroy Traore. The anchor's voice echoed in the minds of millions watching live. But what happened next, no one saw coming. The villain cleared his throat, leaned into the mic, and began. His words were sharp, rehearsed, dripping with condescension. The crowd shifted. Some nodded. Others frowned. Traore remained still. Outside, hashtags began to trend. Inside, the trap was being set. By the end of this hearing, the world would be talking about one name, and it wasn't his. Because Traore wasn't just ready. He was waiting. And the moment he spoke, everything would change. It didn't start in that hearing room. It started months earlier, in backrooms and boardrooms, where powerful men whispered about a problem they couldn't control. His name was Traore, and he wasn't supposed to matter. But he did. Traore had become a voice for the unheard, immigrants, workers, the forgotten. He didn't shout. He didn't grandstand. He spoke with clarity, with conviction, and with something they couldn't replicate, lived truth. Every speech he gave rippled through communities like a quiet revolution. Every policy he proposed threatened the status quo. The room was silent, but the tension was deafening. Dim lights cast long shadows across the polished floor, flickering as camera flashes punctured the stillness like lightning in a storm. Every seat was filled. Journalists leaned forward. Staffers whispered. The air smelled of sweat, ambition, and something colder, intent. He walked in like he owned the place. Crisp suit, chin high, eyes scanning the room with the smugness of a man who believed the outcome was already written. He wasn't here to debate. He was here to dismantle, to humiliate, to destroy. His target sat alone at the far end of the table, hands folded, gaze steady. Traore didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move. He had been through worse, much worse. But today, the stakes were different. Today, the attack wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. He was sent to destroy Traore. The anchor's voice echoed in the minds of millions watching live. But what happened next, no one saw coming. The villain cleared his throat, leaned into the mic, and began. His words were sharp, rehearsed, dripping with condescension. The crowd shifted. Some nodded. Others frowned. Traore remained still. Outside, hashtags began to trend. Inside, the trap was being set. By the end of this hearing, the world would be talking about one name, and it wasn't his. Because Traore wasn't just ready. He was waiting. And the moment he spoke, everything would change. It didn't start in that hearing room. It started months earlier, in backrooms and boardrooms, where powerful men whispered about a problem they couldn't control. His name was Traore, and he wasn't supposed to matter. But he did. Traore had become a voice for the unheard, immigrants, workers, the forgotten. He didn't shout. He didn't grandstand. He spoke with clarity, with conviction, and with something they couldn't replicate, lived truth. Every speech he gave rippled through communities like a quiet revolution. Every policy he proposed threatened the status quo.